America's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, tells the Israelis that Trump will go along with annexation. But Friedman didn't let the White House know that that's what he told the Israelis.
So that's a...
That's why you don't have your bankruptcy lawyer, okay, be the diplomat to a major country that has all these geopolitical problems.
With a new two-part season of How It Happened. It's a story about how Donald Trump's administration failed to achieve peace between Israel and the Palestinians, but in the process reached a different set of agreements that are reshaping the Middle East profoundly and unexpectedly.
The full normalization of ties between the UAE and Israel.
They're called the Abraham Accords.
Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain
agreeing to open diplomatic and economic ties with Israel.
And it all happened almost by accident. The Abraham Accords came together in 2020, while most of us in the United States were focused on COVID, Black Lives Matter protests, and the election. But it's an important story. And here to tell it is my colleague Barak Ravid, who has reported deeply on the region.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, mate. So, Barak, you're Axios's Middle East correspondent. You live in Tel Aviv, and you've been covering the region for 15 years now. You're one of Israel's most respected journalists, and you've been a thorn in former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's side for your reporting on his administration. But you have sources all over the region, and most recently you wrote a book called Trump's Peace, The Abraham Accords and the Reshaping of the Middle East.
Yes, Jonathan. While writing the book, I interviewed dozens of Americans, Israelis, and Arabs who were deeply involved in this process. The Abraham Accords were the biggest breakthrough in the Middle East peace process in the last 25 years. They totally reconfigured relationships within the region, and a bunch of really unlikely people made them happen. And for all the failures Trump had in international affairs and all the controversial decisions like pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, in this area, many Republicans and Democrats think he actually got it right.
And one sign of this is that the Biden administration is currently carrying the Abraham Accords forward and trying to expand on them.
And Jonathan, there's another thing. You've probably heard that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi as he's called, were best buds, that it was a bromance. Well, turns out that's bullshit. By the end of his presidency, Donald Trump couldn't stand Netanyahu. He thought Netanyahu was disloyal and ungrateful for everything he had done for him. By the time I talked to Trump in April 2021, he was over Bibi.
I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. Fuck him. Okay, go ahead.
We're going to tell the story in two parts.
Wait, stop it.
That's pretty based, right?
Wow. How is this not like, because this podcast is not new, right? This is from like 2021.
Yeah.
How was this not reported on?
Trump says, fuck
Donald
him.
Trump said fuck him about Netanyahu.
Right? Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Benjamin Netanyahu. The guy that everyone on the left right now is screaming to be taken out of office.
Yes. Trump didn't like him either. There you go.
Do they impeach in Israel? I don't know. How do you get the guy out of office?
Well, he's prime minister, right? He's not president. And they have those weird prime minister coalition thing.
I don't know the terminology there, but they're screaming, everybody wants him gone. And this podcast, as obviously we're going to get into, I mean, it kind of makes the argument that Netanyahu is to blame for a lot of this stuff that we're watching now. Like more so than just the security threat.
I think so. This is why it's kind of annoying to me how stupid Hassan is, how stupid the leftists are at the moment, is because like their position is so dumb and insane that you have to spend a lot of energy just dismantling how stupid their one-sided, everything is Israel's fault, Israel bad, Palestinians are innocent angels position, because there is blame to go around.
Hell yeah, there is.
There's a lot of blame to go around, and I do think Netanyahu has become essentially a really awful leader of Israel, and a lot of the really awful policies which have helped create more resentment, more anger, and made things worse in the region are directly because of him and his simping, which they talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, we talked about a bit on the Sunday show. I don't know if it was this Sunday or the last Sunday, but and this is really, look, I haven't really followed the Middle East stuff. I'm looking at it now in the same way that I didn't know Ukraine stuff until Ukraine became a thing.
Right. Why would you? Yeah.
And we started looking into it. Yeah. So, I mean, I've read a couple of books and I'm looking at podcasts like this podcast here just to try to make sense of what's going on. And I think the situation with the settlement, the first I heard of the settlements was from you. You basically explained it on the Sunday show. And I mean, it really looks like Benjamin Netanyahu has himself, like part of his winning coalition to stay in office, to stay elected in a democracy, is to appeal to these super right Zionist pro-settlement types.
Yes.
Which is exacerbating the problem over there. It really is. So for the first time, I started thinking, is this a problem with democracy? I mean, I'll ask you, like, if you have a significant portion of the population that is Zionist and wants to basically take over the West Bank, isn't that kind of the same problem that the Gazans have and that they elected Hamas?
Well, I don't know I don't know enough about how the weird un-American prime minister coalitions function.
Right.
Because it's not like in America where it's like you had two parties and, one half, half of Israel is in favor of settlements and the other half isn't. And the half that's in favor of settlements is the one that's like, winning the elections. It's not like that. It's like there's multiple parties and these like weird coalitions have to be formed in, Israel's version of Congress. And however the coalition forms is like who becomes the prime minister. So I don't think my understanding, people do not directly elect Benjamin Netanyahu to be prime minister of Israel.
Right.
And so I don't understand the exact process that occurs to point the fingers of like democracy or not. It could be some weird vestige of however the Israeli system works specifically. But just in terms of like democracy, like, yeah, obviously you can have situations where, and we live in these situations, America's done lots of stupid things where you can live in a democracy and the government is going to make bad decisions based on what the majority of people want. And that is always, a problem with democracy. The whole thing is that, democracy is not a perfect system. It's not a utopian system. It's just the best system we have in terms of results. It keeps producing the best results compared to everything else we've tried.
Well, no, I'm a pro-democracy guy. I definitely am. It's an interesting quandary. Obviously, like in America, we have the Bill of Rights because we have set aside certain things that we're saying, look, these are non-negotiable, okay? If the majority of people want to stifle your speech, look, that's just human nature. The majority of people are going to want to stifle your speech, right? And if you make that up for debate, up for election, you're going to lose freedom of speech. So we basically say that's where the Bill of Rights came from. Right. And I don't know. The more I think about this way of conceptualizing democracy, you almost need some sort of Bill of Rights. You need some sort of negotiated rights that are just non-negotiable because a majority of people will try to take them from other people.
Right. So just to be clear, though, the Bill of Rights is not, the amendments to the Constitution are negotiable. They can be changed. They can be removed. It's just significantly harder to change it than just a normal law. It requires a lot more than just a majority.
Right. It's supermajority, right?
Yeah, well, it requires a
supermajority.
It requires a supermajority in Congress, but then also the states all have to ratify it independently.
You mean we could get rid of the First Amendment?
Yeah, we could.
Wow.
It's
I guess
highly
I guess
unlikely.
you're right.
Yeah, it's just very
because the
difficult.
Bill of Rights are the first like 10 amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, the First Amendment could be removed. It's just so it'd be number one. It's very difficult to do. So your point, your broader point, I agree with completely, is that you do, even in democracy, you want to have parts of your law, parts that have to do with usually pertaining to the rights and protections of individual citizens, as well as some of how the government functions. You do want to have those things be behind
off limits, or
not off limits, but like behind. You want them to be gate kept in such a way that it's significantly more difficult to alter them beyond just a simple majority. Because yeah, you could easily get a simple majority. Like, I mean, like 20 years from now, you get a simple majority of woke people that want to get rid of free speech. Or we could have had a simple majority of right wingers in the past, 30, 40 years ago, that would have wanted to get rid of
freedom of speech,
freedom of speech, or wanted to say flag burning does not, protect it or something, right? So no, you're right. You do want to have certain freedoms and protections that are beyond the normal majority level, which is part of why I think America succeeds so much.
Yeah. Look, and a lot of other countries obviously try to style their government on American government because they perceive American government as being so successful in the world. So that's why I'm interested in it. That's why I think about it. I don't, and you brought it up with the Israel thing. I don't know how the particulars of how Israel's government functions. Like if they're able to do this with a simple majority or even less than a simple majority, because if they're dealing with a party system where, you've got 4 or 5 competing parties, you're talking about a small minority of the electorate that's actually running the ship, running the show, right?
Right.
Because if you have 5 parties and each one has roughly 20%, I mean, you're winning an election off of 21, 22%. Let's say, just, take a couple percentage points from the others. That's not a giant majority. I mean, that's not even a majority. So if you're able to do that with 20% of the electorate that's into these settlements, I mean, that's a problem. That's a giant problem.
Yeah. And Misram has some comment about this exact situation and how these happen. For 500 Kazarks, thank you. Says, what often happens in multi-party democracies is that a niche party with small support becomes a kingmaker. If you have 50 seats in parliament and your opposition has 49, but then there's a third party with 2 seats, they gain outsized influence.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny because that's kind of exactly what happened with the ousting of McCarthy. Was like
exactly what happened.
Gates and the 8 Republicans were essentially this like small niche faction of the Republican Party that can almost be thought of as like a different party that has outsized influence that can control things.
Yeah, that's so our party system in the United States, it has become nearly a 50-50 split, could actually be advantageous in a weird kind of way.
That's what's kind of interesting, because people talk about how should have more than a 2-party system. And while there's part of me that wants to agree that intuitively, because it seems like you can't.
More choices are better, right?
Right. More choices are better. You can't like shove every person's belief system into like just a binary. But then these multi-party countries have their own host of problems that they have to deal with. And I'm not sure which is the better outcome.
Yeah. All right. Shall I continue?
Keep it up.
Play the video.
First, the failed deal with the Palestinians, and how, out of the ashes of that, Trump managed to forge a surprising deal with countries like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan.
This is how it happened. Trump's big deal. Part 1. May your house be destroyed.
Oof.
Barack, why do you think President Trump wanted so badly to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians?
For Donald Trump, this was the ultimate deal, and he really wanted to be this guy that manages to do what almost any other president couldn't.
So at the start of his presidency, who does Donald Trump task with brokering the Israeli-Palestinian deal?
Well, it starts right before Trump is inaugurated. He went to brief the New York Times, and he told them in an off-the-record session that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, is going to lead the diplomatic efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East.
Trump has decided to name his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as a senior advisor on the White House staff with a wide-ranging portfolio,
leading critics to accuse Trump of nepotism.
So am I right in understanding that President Trump told the New York Times about this decision before he told Jared Kushner?
Yeah, that's completely true. Kushner didn't know anything about this. He had no experience on this issue, and he didn't even think he's going to deal with it. He was a real estate guy, not a diplomat. When Kushner gets to the White House, he jokes with his team that he thinks the president gave him this assignment because he doesn't really like him.
Okay.
I remember those early years.
Yeah, this is super interesting.
Okay. What is going on here? This is so weird because, like, so Trump tells the press before he tells the person that they're giving, that he's going to give Kushner this, like, massive responsibility. Like, what is that? Is he screwing with him? Is he just so rash that he just does what, like, things like right off the hook? Like, what's going on there?
He just thought of it on the spot. Are you kidding
That's
me?
what I'm saying. You just like, yeah, like, I just had this idea and he just says it. Like, what's going on? Is he so impulsive? He just had the idea pop in his head and he just tells a reporter, like, what the heck is happening?
Look, this is why it's always important to be lucky more than anything else. It really is. Look, this is brash and without thinking. But again, Trump gets lucky.
Yes.
Because it makes sense to the Arab countries that a family member has more pull than just some bureaucrat. So it actually works
think that was
giantly to his
advantage. You think that was what was happening?
Well, look, maybe Trump did it intuitively. Maybe Trump, I don't know if, hasn't Trump had a bunch of business dealings with various Arab nations? I feel like he has.
Well, I don't know. But there's two elements here. There's the first element that you're talking about, which is why would you have Jared Kushner do this when he has no experience to do it in the first place?
Right.
And it's kind of what you're speaking to. And it would be interesting. I didn't even conceive of that. Is that like,
well, they say that in here. Maybe they had.
Maybe it was in part 2 where I missed it. But in the Western world, in the Western liberal world,
it's considered nepotism and like the wrong thing to do immediately.
Right. It's gauche. Yes. It's nepotistic for the president to assign his son, who has literally no experience, to do this. This is like, Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma. Like, why is he on? Like, okay, what's going on here? But then you're right. It's interesting ideas. Like, well, maybe from the Arab world, where they don't care about like that kind of liberalism and nepotism and family ties are kind of expected, they would view this as more serious. And so that's an interesting thing.
That's exactly what happens. They say later in the podcast. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's fascinating.
So he totally lucks out.
Right. So and so that's the question. Was it just luck, or was that something that Trump actually thought about and had some foreknowledge about? I have no clue. But I
would guess no, but I mean,
yeah, I would guess no. Well, I would guess no because of the second thing, which is, why would he, even if he had thought about this, why would he not tell Jared this or discuss this with Jared before just saying it publicly?
Look, I just think Trump is lucky. Trump gets lucky time and time again.
I mean, what it sounds like is essentially there's one or two possibilities, I think, that are going on here. Number one, Trump is just so impulsive that he just says things to reporters off the top of his head, which is very possible. Or number two is that he thought about this and he thought for whatever reason, he wanted Jared Kushner to do this. And he thought that if he talked to Jared Kushner privately, Jared Kushner would say no.
Yeah.
Right.
That could be. That's a good
right.
guess.
And so he's like, well, I'm just going to say publicly that he's doing it to make it harder for him to back off, to back down from doing it.
That could be.
Yeah.
It's
weird. It's definitely a weird
speculation.
Move. Right. I don't think that's how you necessarily want to run your presidential administration, but I mean, if it works, I guess.
Kushner thinks that he's doing it to mess with him. Like, Kushner's like, what the heck? I got no experience doing this. I'm a real estate guy.
Yeah. I mean, Kushner joked about that. Maybe that was his real thoughts. Because I mean, I might feel the same way if I was Jared Kushner. I'd be like, what the hell? Listen, I know you're jealous that I married your daughter, but come on.
Had to go there, Sitch. Had to
We
go
were
there.
all thinking it, Adam. Everyone was thinking it.
You were thinking it.
Of the Trump presidency very well. Kushner had come to Washington with a pretty deep contempt for the Washington-style politics and diplomacy. And he was full of confidence, having just come off the Trump campaign. Some of his colleagues thought it was an arrogance that inhabited him at that time. And people who talked to him at that time felt like they were talking to someone who just ingested a bunch of Silicon Valley business books. You know, he was talking about this White House being completely different, that they were bringing private sector thinking to Washington. It was the startup culture, you know, throwing away the rule book, all those cliches. And the effects that this mindset had on the way that things turned out cannot be overstated. To a large extent, Jared Kushner thought of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict like a real estate deal.
For a moment, imagine a new reality in the Middle East.
This is Kushner at the Peace to Prosperity workshop in Bahrain in 2019.
Imagine a bustling commercial and tourist center in Gaza and the West Bank where international businesses come together and thrive.
Kushner's
Sounds like gentrification to me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and I guess we'll see, you know, how much it works, what doesn't work, what works. Because sometimes the old traditional conservative ideas about something can become prisons and they can trap you. And you do need to have a new, fresh take to kind of shake the box and say, well, maybe we should be looking at this from a completely new perspective. And so you can have a young gun, so to speak, like Kushner come in and completely change everything and change the way that you perceive a situation. And it can definitely lead to something good, or it could horribly backfire because the traditional way of viewing something existed for a specific reason because it was accurate. So
yeah, totally. It's interesting that his pitch is just commerce. The Gaza Strip is a pretty good piece of land there for resorts.
I mean, it makes sense from his, if you're a business person, I mean, the whole thing that you're thinking about is how do we make something make money? Which
of course
isn't the worst way to look at countries, because if a country is being run by a person who is pragmatic in any regard, that is generally the underlying thing the country is trying to do, is figure out a way to make more money for itself, because that's going to lead to more success. The problem is when you have a certain country's leadership has an ideological constraint on itself, whether the leaders just have it because they have to placate the people or a class of people, or whether the leaders themselves have the ideological constraint. That's when you get into all these trouble spots.
What would the ideological constraint be?
Well, it would be an a religious Islamic constraint.
Right. So an anti-capitalist bent, but from a Islamic perspective.
Yeah,
I could see that. Look, it's interesting to me that the socialists, the anti-capitalists, the communists, the Hassan types, the Vosh types, they are so, they love democracy. They always say, look, I want to get democracy in the workplace. Democracy is so amazing. I want democracy. Democracy's great. But capitalism is, a lot like democracy. It really is, right? You're trying to develop products and services that appeal to a large population so that they will part with their money to purchase those products and services, right? And if they don't want those products and services, if enough people don't want your product and service, in a democratic type of way, you go out of business. You don't make that product or service anymore. So it baffles me that the similarities between democracy and capitalism are so there, but it always seems to elude them.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for the similarities, which is that if we remember, the term capitalism was created by well, it wasn't created by, but it was created by leftists and popularized by Marx. You know, when free market systems were first established, they were not called capitalism. And they were seen as, this is kind of like a new thing that we forget because of how our modern world works. But back in the day, what we now call capitalism and markets were viewed as inextricably tied to liberalism. They were viewed as the economic system of the political social system of liberalism because of what you're saying. They function very similarly, you know, to democracy, to the way liberalism functions. And it was only sort of when communism kind of arose that you, and really even modern socialism now, because socialism has failed so many times, that you get these kind of socialist revisionists who want to sort of say, well, let's keep the parts of liberalism that we like, you know, like democracy, and let's just get rid of the parts that we don't like, you know, like capitalism.
Like capital, really? Okay.
Yeah.
But I look at things, I try to break things down to just their simplest form. And in its simplest form, democracy and capitalism, I mean, they're virtually the same. They really are. Like you're basically, like if you're in the tourist industry, you're basically saying, look, we want to develop this piece of property to entice people to come here without any force.
Yeah.
Right? We want them to come here of their own free will and have a great time and want to come back again. Like, how is that not similar to saying, look, I'm a candidate for Congress and I want you to vote for me because I'm going to make your life better in this tangible way through this policy that you will want and love and reelect me to continue to provide this policy for you. Like, how are these things different?
They're not. And I mean, my guess would be that's why. And I don't know if this is true, but I don't know if there's been a country that's been a functioning free democracy that has a socialist economy. Like, I don't know if that's a thing that's been successful.
Authoritarianism is exactly the opposite. It's like, look, we're a small elite and you're going to do what we want you to do, bitch.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, it's completely different. Yeah. I just it baffles me that they can't make the connection, that they absolutely despise capitalism, but they put democracy up on this pedestal because you get choice. Well,
yeah, but the thing is, it's weird because democracy is completely incompatible with socialism. And I don't know how many of them know this and are just like doing a grift, or how many of them are just naive and think otherwise. Yeah. Because like if it wasn't, and this is what I always say when we talk to the socialists, I say, you can go start as many co-ops as you want right now.
Right.
Okay. If your economic model of business production is so much better than the capitalist model, then just go do it. And it will literally win. It will dominate markets because it will be a better way to do it and people will prefer it instead. And yet that never comes into pass. And the reason it never comes to pass is because even if there are workers that probably might enjoy, you know, getting paid more and doing all these things, it is less efficient overall. And so our world is kind of biased in favor of ease of use and efficiency and consistency in terms of producing results. And so I think Ben Burgess even said this the first time we ever talked to him, that he understood that the economic system that he was advocating for would really only work if it's like the entire world adopted it
at once,
which is like, well, good luck, I guess, you know, like that's not really going to be a feasible system then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting dilemma. How to explain it. I guess you'll never explain it in a way because they're so invested in the narrative that capitalism is evil.
Yes.
Evil Western oppression. I guess they only really see it from if you're at the bottom of the economic ladder I can see why you'd have that perspective.
Well, and just to be clear, just as you brought up earlier, straight democracy is bad, because then you could have a situation where the majority screws over the minority. You just vote all their rights away and enslave them. And that's why it's good that we have a constitution and amendments in the Bill of Rights, which require significantly more, they have significantly more gatekeeping than just a simple majority. It requires a lot of work to change some of these things. And in my mind, it's the same thing with capitalism and free markets. You want to have a system, a general system of free markets, but certain things need to be gate kept to make it significantly harder beyond just the will of markets, just beyond the will of the majority.
Yeah, this is why we avoid monopolies and have regulations. So
yes, exactly.
Certain players don't dominate the marketplace.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Appointment was heavily critiqued, but in the Middle East, Kushner's appointment was actually perceived differently. For many countries in the region, including Israel, it made sense talking to someone who was part of the president's family.
Kushner wanted to avoid relitigating history, but that's not an option that's available to you when you're dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. History is everywhere, and it soon became the ultimate obstacle to what they were trying to deliver. So after he's appointed, Jared Kushner and President Trump assemble a team. And what I remember from that time is they put together a circle of advisors who ranged from very pro-Israel to very, 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 very pro-Israel. Figures like David Friedman, Trump's bankruptcy lawyer, who Trump appointed as ambassador to Israel. The funny thing was, early on in the conversations this team was having...
You like that?
It's so funny because it's like, I remember like Trump got all these accusations of anti-Semitism. And I'm like, his son-in-law married to the daughter he wants to be married to is Jewish, and he's giving his son-in-law, the reins on Middle Eastern policy. And now we have like his team on this is the range, the gambit is from pro-Israel to insanely pro-Israel. And I'm like, okay, how is we're going to say Trump is anti-Semitic? Like, what's happening here?
This is the power of the media. And this is why people hate the mainstream media now, because like they did a good job of gaslighting 50% of the population into thinking Trump is a literal Nazi.
Yeah.
It's that's too much power, man.
Yeah. But that's the problem, because then when he does something that is really bad, like all the January 6th crap, people have become numb because the cry of wolf has become so loud and so consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, the January 6th stuff is obviously inexcusable. So
right. But that's nothing to do with being racist or being anti-Semitic or some identity group or something.
No, it comes from being a narcissistic egomaniac, which this entire podcast confirms.
That's true.
I mean, look, this is the thing. You got to have, you have to develop a system that narcissistic egomaniacs can actually do some good in the world.
Right.
And I mean, that's what our political system strives to be. I've heard some people making the argument that if Trump is reelected, that he will try and stay in office. I don't know if I believe that. I think the institutions are strong enough to boot him out of office. Well, no, I think he just wants a second term. Like, I don't think he wants to be president for life. I think he wants to be a 2-term president because obviously that bodes well for his legacy, and all these people are worried about their legacy.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think the argument that is a little disturbing is that he's going to spend his entire second term, weaponizing the government to go after his political enemies, which are growing by the day, right? That makes me more nervous than him trying to stay in office.
Right. Yeah, no, well, so I agree, and I said this multiple times. I don't believe Trump wants to be president forever, especially given his age.
Right.
Though there is one caveat, there's one asterisk to that, which is, there is a possibility of the classic authoritarian problem of, I want to stay president for as long as possible to defer going to jail. But
Yeah.
I don't believe that. I believe our institutions are strong enough that there's no mechanism in place which would ever allow Trump to become president more than twice. So I'm not concerned about that. We watched a clip of Rachel Maddow, was very concerned about that. I'm not. To me, that's not a. I think what you're saying is more realistic.
Well, this is another reason. Look, there's two ways to go about it if you're worried about the justice system incarcerating you once you leave office. You can stay in office or you can destroy the justice system.
Right.
So
yeah, but a lot of these, like the trials against him, the cases against him, some of them are state level, so he just has no ability to destroy them from that perspective or from that angle. So
I mean, never say never.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know the exact structure of these things, but
Right.
I mean, I guess if it's elected officials at the state level. Yeah, I've heard some people say that they're worried about Trump staying in office. I worry more about him weaponizing the government for nefarious means.
Right.
I just think that's a better argument. I mean, do you disagree?
No, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah. Okay.
The person who seemed to care most about the Palestinian side was Trump himself.
And what a lot of people don't know.
Okay, so
Trump is anti. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. But that is interesting. Why was Trump inclined personally to be on the more pro-Palestinian side of things?
I backed
or I guess
it up a little bit.
Maybe not even pro, just to care about it. Where why would he surround himself with a bunch of insanely pro-Israeli people if he's like the outlier?
It's just off of the intuition of dealing with the players. They talk about it.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. How much of this did you listen to?
I listened to this, but I kind of was doing other things, so maybe I missed.
Okay.
Stuff.
I backed it up a little bit.
Team. And what I remember from that time is they put together a circle of advisors who ranged from very pro-Israel to very, 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 very pro-Israel. Figures like David Friedman, Trump's bankruptcy lawyer, who Trump appointed as ambassador to Israel. The funny thing was, early on in the conversations this team was having, the person who seemed to care most about the Palestinian side was Trump himself.
And what a lot of people don't know is that actually in the first year of his presidency, and Trump told me this, his relationship with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was very, very good.
And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer.
Wait, did he say like?
So you see, look.
Yes.
The guy was nice to him.
Yes.
It's simple. It's all. He whispered to Trump's elephant, and Trump's elephant listened.
Yeah. Well, Trump definitely seems like a person who is like pure elephant. Okay.
Yeah, he was nice to him. Yeah. He's like, look, my bankruptcy lawyer sends me giant bills that I have to pay.
Well, he was so nice to him that he referred to him like a father, which is pretty insane.
Right.
But I think one of Trump's biggest problems when he was president was either because he was new to the game, he didn't have like the list of people, number one, or just maybe his personality of who he trusts. He doesn't care about the list. He just wants people he knows. Was that he would very often seem to just kind of flippantly appoint people he knew or people that liked him to these very high posts, which maybe they shouldn't have been appointed to. Because maybe all the people, maybe he just knew a bunch of people that just incidentally were very pro-Israel. And so that's how he ends up being like the only person who's like moderate, like on the committee that's supposed to figure out this issue.
It's tough being in this situation for anyone with an enormous amount of power, because you're doling power out to different players, and you want to know that they're people you can trust. Obviously, if you give power to the wrong person and they abuse it, that's going to come back to haunt you. So yes. I mean, I get it. I totally get it. This is why these high trust societies are so valuable, because You can meet somebody that has some aptitude for doing a job in a meritocratic sense and get some sense that they're not going to screw you over.
Yeah, but see,
go ahead.
It's interesting that you say that because I didn't even think about that. I think that could be one of the flaws of associating business thinking with government thinking, because if you're like CEO of a corporation, I feel like there's a lot more room for you to assign a person to some high position in the company that could work to undermine you, where I think it's significantly like less likely to happen in government.
Why? Why?
Because it's first of all, it's significantly easier for the president to just get rid of you. Just says you're gone, right? With the CEO, there can be all sorts of other factors here, but just the way the thought process and how people exist in a private space versus a government space is just very differently. When you're like hired to work at a company, you're not thinking I work at the pleasure of the CEO. Like that's not the view of your job. Your view is I've been hired to do a job to make this company money. And if I can figure out a way to make the company money better than the CEO can, I can actually like work around him, maybe even supplant him someday. That's not really the thought process when you're in put on a diplomat of Israel. Like the diplomat of Israel is generally not thinking like, if I diplomat so well, I'm going to supplant the president with my, diplomating powers.
There are a lot of people, though, that are obviously working up the status hierarchy. Like they become a congressman with their eye on becoming a senator, with their eye on becoming president.
Yeah, but so you can have people in the opposite party, and maybe this is a better comparison too, because you have a 2-term presidency. It's probably also not an effective use of your time and energy if you're appointed by that president to do a job to try to screw them over to supplant them, because they're going to be gone. They're going to time out anyway. In a corporation, people don't time out. They'll be the CEO for 50 years, right?
Right.
Or they'll be in some position of power for 50 years. With the president, the person who puts you in your position of power and could just fire you whenever they want, that person is going to be gone on their own in 8 years maximum. So why are you going to try to screw the person? Why are you going to try to screw your greatest asset over?
Well, if they're in your way, obviously.
Yeah, but it's better to just wait for them to be gone.
Yeah, I don't really see any distinction. Like people talk about office politics all the time, which office is like a business setting, but politics is part of that. And part of the politics is moving up the ranks in employment. So I don't see a fundamental difference between the government hierarchy and the business hierarchy.
Okay. I think I just explained the difference. I think you can say that there's a similarity in lower levels of politics where people are more cutthroat with each other. And also in politics when there's clear party divisions, which in a corporation doesn't exist. There are factions, but they don't exist the way parties do in America. So, but whatever, I can continue.
I mean, there are factions in corporations, though, obviously.
I know, that's what I said.
Yeah. But just not
but you're all working
factions.
towards the same goal of making the company money usually, where in politics you're not. You're working towards the same goal of having the country not fall apart, but that's kind of more vaguely detached from what everyone's doing.
There are group goals and there are individual goals, and those goals sometimes are in conflict. Obviously, the group goals are like get more Democrats elected, right?
Right.
But there are also, I would like to be a congressperson instead of a state senator, or I would like to be a senator, or I would like to be a governor, but there are other people in my party competing to be governors. And there's also like, there's a job opening and I would like that job opening, and there are 6 other people in my business competing for that job opening.
I understand, but I'm just saying it seems like in politics there's not a lot of supplanting in terms of like you work for the senator and then you basically get the senator out of office and steal the job. That doesn't seem to be the way it works in politics. It seems to be like you work for the senator and then he helps you become senator, when they move up to be president or something. I'm just saying it seems like it works differently.
Okay.
But whatever.
Like a father?
Yeah. And even, Trump told me that he was surprised by how positively he felt towards him.
Now, the world and me, before I met with both of them, I thought it was the exact opposite. I thought the Palestinians were impossible, and the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true.
And I find it very interesting and actually kind of surprising that, like Obama and Bill Clinton, Trump also came to the conclusion that Bibi was not sincere about wanting peace with the Palestinians.
I think he just tapped us along. He just tap, tap, tap. I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make peace.
We'll just pause it for 1 second.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, right?
I think that you could definitely throw that criticism at Bibi Netanyahu. I think he's not a good leader, and he doesn't want peace. I don't think it serves his interest to have peace, which is why we don't have it.
It doesn't serve his electoral interest at all.
Yeah, it doesn't serve his power interest. But I think it's a little deceptive for the person who's talking to say, like Bill Clinton, maybe Bill Clinton thought that about Bibi Netanyahu. I don't know when Bibi Netanyahu came into power, but obviously when
in the
Clinton,
90s, like he's been in power forever.
Yeah, but he wasn't prime minister in the 90s. He was not prime minister when they were doing the Camp David peace talks between Yasser Arafat and whoever the other person was that Clinton was hosting. I mean, it was the Palestinian leader that was the one that was rebuffing every advance for peace. He's the one that Clinton said was the one that was just dragging them along and didn't want actual peace and kind of screwed over, before Netanyahu took in charge, when they had a far more sympathetic prime minister. It was the Palestinian leader who was kind of screwing over the peace at that time. So that's why I'm saying it seems to me a little. It was Arafat that was, screwing every like the peace talks over. So to me, it seems a little strange to kind of include Clinton in that mix the way that he just did.
Netanyahu rose to prominence after being elected as the chairman of Likud in 1993, became leader of the opposition. Becoming leader of the opposition. So 1993 is when he became prominent, but you are correct. He was not prime minister.
Yeah, he was like a big politician, but he wasn't the prime minister. So, yeah. It says he was. When was he prime minister?
In 1996 election, Netanyahu beat Simon, becoming the first Israel prime minister elected directly by popular vote.
Oh, interesting.
At his youngest ever. So he became prime minister in 1996. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's a long time ago.
But then he lost in 1999, though.
Oh, he did? Okay. Right. So he pulled a Trump. He was like...
He came back in 2005, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Because
interesting.
When was because the Camp David summit was 2000. So that was after he'd been prime minister once and then lost. And
he's doing some...
It was with Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak.
He's doing some controversial court packing scheme, or he's trying to undermine
the court system. Yeah,
the court system. Yeah, the Supreme Court equivalent in Israel. But I don't know much about that. I've just heard it in passing. I haven't read into it yet.
Yeah, my understanding is that he's basically, someone was even, I don't know if it's true. There was a critique that that Yahoo is such a Yahoo that maybe part of the reason that the October 7th attacks occurred was because he was basically getting rid of a lot of competent people all throughout the government that were anti him or were not pro enough him.
Is this not straight dictator's handbook?
Right. And so he got rid of a lot of competent people that were, in charge of intelligence, things of that nature. And maybe he put a bunch of incompetent
loyalists,
sycophants and loyalists in charge of key places, and that kind of screwed over things, number one. And that the only place that he hasn't really been able to change yet was the court system.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I'm always telling Aiden Paladin when we argue about monarchy, right?
Right.
You got to get all the competent people who want to kill you and take your job out of the way. That's in the monarchy setting, obviously, but
sure.
it holds true here as well. I mean, obviously, if he's replacing competent people with incompetent people just because they're loyal to him, that's a giant trade-off that hurts so many people,
Right.
and helps only Bibi.
Yep.
So, given the status of Trump's attitude towards Abbas and Netanyahu at the time, the next thing Trump did was quite surprising.
Yeah, he moves the embassy to Jerusalem and he recognizes Jerusalem as Israel's capital. It's a huge moment. It's a turning point in this story. It's also a giant middle finger to the Palestinians. Barak, how did Trump make this decision?
Both Israel and the Palestinians see Jerusalem to be their capital. So recognizing Jerusalem is basically taking one side on an issue that has made several rounds of peace negotiations collapse in the last 25 years. And you know, Jonathan, for Trump, this decision was political. He did it for his evangelical base. Trump and his advisors, they knew that moving the embassy would harm their peace efforts, but they thought Jerusalem would be just a bump on the road. That turned out to be a huge miscalculation. The Palestinians found out about this when a delegation came to the White House towards the end of 2017. Jared Kushner told their chief negotiator, the late Saeb Erekat, that the embassy was moving to Jerusalem. Erekat was stunned, and later, in a talk at the Doha Forum in Qatar, he described what exactly happened.
I told him, look, if you do this, you would have disqualified yourself from any role in the peace process. He replied, don't threaten me, shouting. He said, look, this is our business and this is our policies. So I replied to him, if you do this, you will bring Israelis and Palestinians to the points of disasters.
The Palestinians had lost one of the things that mattered to them most. They were so angry they stormed out of the White House and never came back. A little later, Trump called Palestinian President Abbas. He told Abbas, don't worry, you will get something big next. But Abbas was really angry. Trump went on a long monologue of trying to calm down Abbas, and at a certain point, he realized that Abbas' line had dropped. And he's been talking to himself for several minutes. The operator asked the president if he wanted to reconnect the call, and he said, well, you know what? I'll call him another day. And that was the last time they spoke, on December 5th, 2017. The next day, Trump announces that he's moving the embassy.
That it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Israel is celebrating, the Palestinians are furious. And President Abbas, in a meeting of the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, curses Trump in Arabic, Yachrabetak, which in English is, may your house be destroyed. This is the worst thing you can say about anybody. And he says it about the President of the United States.
Okay.
Trump hits back. In the next few...
Okay, so this is very interesting. You have a situation, this would be my guess how the situation came to be, where you have Trump is very impulsive. And he also probably, I mean, he said that Trump and his advisors like understood, but they didn't really understand, obviously, because they wouldn't have done this. I think this could have been his business thought clouding his judgment to think like, okay, this is something symbolic, but, you know, pragmatically, who cares? We all, you know, everyone understands that Jerusalem's really the capital of Israel already. So this is just kind of like a symbolic thing. Who cares? It's not a big deal. And, you know, we can leverage this, you know, from Israel, and then we can use that to leverage Israel to give some sort of concession to the Palestinians, right? And he had kind of this business tit for tat mentality, I would imagine, here. And because he has basically has a bunch of advisors who are all Israeli, super pro-Israel simps at the moment, they all basically just agree to this. And
yeah, they don't give him the inside. They say, oh, they'll get over it. It'll be just fine.
Right. I mean, to think that's just going to be a little bump in the road. Like you're just going to do it and they're just going to be fine with it. And it's like, no, they weren't fine with it.
That's what
this massive deal. Yeah.
I'm sure the Israel advisors were telling them, oh, it's no problem. It's just a little bump in the road. It's no big deal. They'll get over it.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's what they were telling him.
of course. I'm
They
sure
were
it's exactly
lying to him.
right. Well, I mean, maybe they didn't know. I don't know. I don't know what these guys'
No,
experiences was. He had
They
Trump's
knew.
his
They
bankruptcy
knew.
lawyer. He's gonna make him like a diplomat. His fucking
Okay, maybe that
bankruptcy
guy
lawyer.
didn't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
like it's like, I don't know these guys' experiences. I was like, oh, it's not a big deal, right? Because they're just thinking about they're thinking about it from a
Totally.
business perspective. Where
No,
from
I
a business perspective,
I
who
agree.
cares? Right.
I agree 100% with everything you said. Like it is that mindset that it's just business. It's just business. They'll get
Right.
over it. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
They're like,
And
this is my religion.
right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's part of the issue is that, as we said, there are religious and there are ideological constraints that operate in a lot of politics and a lot of leadership.
Of course.
That makes them do things that might seem irrational to someone who doesn't have those same constraints.
Yeah, one thing in one culture can be totally innocuous, and in another culture it's like this grave disrespect. Like you basically have turned the person into a laughing stock. Which, I mean, that's the problem with the cultural differences here. Because that's what happened. Like he totally disgraced these people and he didn't know it.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because if Trump did really have this like super positive relationship with the
He should
president
have known that,
of the
right?
Palestinian Authority, he could have really leveraged that maybe into, well, maybe he couldn't because maybe Netanyahu was such a piece of shit that he wouldn't actually try. But theoretically, that could have been leveraged into something, maybe some peace, something good. But that was all, and then from his perspective, from the head of the PA's perspective, of course he's going to leverage the most horrendous insult ever, because if he did have this positive relationship with Trump, and then Trump goes and turns around and does this without even consulting them, it's going to feel like a massive betrayal.
Well, look, he dropped the call and he didn't even call him back. So that's kind of an insult.
In the middle of he just drops the call, right?
Doesn't call him back.
Well, and then also with Kushner, and that kind of to me shows Kushner's lack of experience as a diplomat. Like if what he's saying is true, if that quote is accurate, it's like someone is saying, if you do, from a foreign policy perspective, they say, if you do X, we're going to do Y. And Kushner's response is to become defensive and say, don't threaten me. Like, what is that response? They're just telling you what they're going to do. They're just explaining how the foreign policy is going to work. Like, what is this defensiveness?
Do we continue?
Yeah.
Few months, he cuts nearly all aid to the Palestinians. He closes the PLO office in Washington and shuts down the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, which is the U.S. diplomatic mission to the Palestinian Authority.
That's the guy he didn't call back, right? Did all that stuff.
Wait, go back a second. So, because did Trump do this, or I'm confused who?
No, I think the Palestinian guy did. I backed it up 30 seconds.
Etak, which in English is "May your house be destroyed." This is the worst thing you can say about anybody. And he says it about the President of the United States. Trump hits back. In the next few months, he cuts nearly all aid to the Palestinians.
So it's Trump hitting back against him.
Right.
So he does this thing. The guy says, fuck you, may your house burn down. And Trump is like, no, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
He closes the PLO office in Washington and shuts down the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, which is the U.S. diplomatic mission to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians never came back to the table.
Don't you love how politics is just basically Mean Girls?
I hate it. I hate it so much. It's so pathetic. Oh,
it's like, God. What can we do? I know, let's close their office down.
It's so blackpilling. It's so pathetic when you find out how so many of these like high level foreign policy things break down because one side or both sides are just acting like fucking high school girls and can't put aside whatever their personal grievances are for, the higher mission of the countries. It's wild to me.
I mean, I kind of like it for the drama. I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
okay.
I think it's kind of hilarious.
I mean, I don't know how much it mattered. Like in this situation, I don't know how much it matters because if Netanyahu is not willing to make peace, it doesn't really matter what America-Palestinian relations are. But this could matter if in the future Benjamin Netanyahu is gone, which I think is very possible after all this stuff with Gaza ends or slows down. I think it's very possible he will lose office. And if they get someone who is more sympathetic or to working with the PA, we need to have America that the PA trusts to broker some kind of legitimate deal. And I don't know if this incident is going to be seen as like, well, America is not trustworthy anymore, or if it will just be like localized to just Trump.
Yeah, this, I mean, has sort of a happy ending anyway with the Abraham Accords. We're obviously 2 years in the future now. I don't know with the October 7th stuff. The Abraham Accords may be doomed, but I do think it's interesting. Trump closes down the guy's office. I mean, Putin would have tried to assassinate him, right? I mean,
I don't know if Putin tried to assassinate a foreign leader, but they would do,
I'm just saying, look, there's closing his office and then there's drone strike.
Sure.
Sometimes the Mean Girls is better.
But this is kind of ridiculous because it's like, I mean, the guy had every right to be upset.
Of course he did. Look, he didn't even call him back. What the hell?
Right. So for Trump to be like, no, fuck you, to me is kind of like, well, okay, that's like, give me a break. Like,
look, if the phone drops and the person doesn't call you back, you're like, what the fuck?
Well, no, I mean the implication is that the guy hung up on Trump. So I don't blame Trump for not calling back.
Oh, okay.
Right. I think the guy he was tired of listening to Trump bluster on, so he hung up, which I'm sure really pissed Trump off significantly.
Well, why didn't they say that in the podcast? They just said the line got disconnected.
Well, no, he said the operator. Well, I think that's the implication that I got. And that's why the operator's like, would you like to call back? Like the operator is listening. Okay, you're the operator for the president of the United States, and you're listening to the president go on and on and on to the head of the PA. The head of the PA hangs up in disgust. And you know this as the operator, okay? Because you see the switchboard.
That is an uncomfortable break-in.
And then but
you don't know.
Hasn't realized this.
Look, if you're the operator, you don't know if it got disconnected or if he hung up.
Okay, that's true. You're the operator. Let me just say this: you're the operator. You suspect that the guy hung up in disgust because you're listening to the phone call. You understand the context of the situation.
Look,
wait. Let me just finish. Okay. And the president hasn't noticed because the president is just talking and talking and talking, and there's no break for the operator to enter in the conversation to say the phone call has been disconnected. And you're sitting there like, oh my God, do I let them keep going? Do I interrupt the president? Like, you're like this weird dilemma.
I know, it's like, horrible. It's like a Hollywood movie.
Yes. How long do I let the president go on and on to fucking no one before I interrupt them and tell them that they're just talking to themselves?
This is a horrible, horrible situation.
It's
look,
hilarious.
This is why when I hang up on people, I say, fuck you.
There you go.
That's the respectful way to hang up on somebody.
Oh, sure. That's very respectful, yeah.
Anyway, let us continue.
When we come back, we'll tell you a story you haven't heard before. It's about the real relationship between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
They were gay lovers.
True.
That's what he tells us when he.
That's what Kanye was trying to tell us.
Don't you? Why do they do this when we come back and then we're back? Watch this.
Well, I'm assuming there's a commercial wherever this was played originally.
We're back.
We're not back. Oh, now we're back.
Let me play. These podcasts with all the sound effects, like if they just scream 2000 to me, like don't they seem dated to you? Like
it's because
look, we're Radio Lab. Look at all these sound effects that we have in our podcast.
It's because that's how radio used to operate, and I think a lot of boomers are operating as if podcasts operate the way radio operates.
Right.
with all these sound effects and musical breaks and all this other stuff, where us young, hip, millennial, and Zoomer types are used to the very long form streams that are just a bunch of a-holes talking, for like hours and hours.
Look,
and hours
we don't have any sound effects for you. Like, get out of here. You want sound effects?
Should I bring up the soundboard? Do I need to bring in Paul Blart, Mall Lawyer, to read something for us?
The sound effects they're like boomer catnip, right?
They do, they
look
do.
At this. Look at these interesting sounds. It's
You
like a cornucopia of sound.
You like that little the Japanese school chime?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Class is now in session.
I got those chimes on my porch.
Okay.
Barak, what's happening with Benjamin Netanyahu at this point?
So at that moment, when the Palestinians cut off ties with the White House, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is watching from the sidelines, is overjoyed.
Of course
he starts
is.
to capitalize on the situation. It's like every day there's something new that Trump is doing for Israel. First, the embassy opens in Jerusalem.
The embassy is opening this morning on Israel's 70th anniversary. Ivanka Trump and her husband Jared Kushner are there.
Then, Trump leaves the nuclear deal with Israel's sworn enemy, Iran.
This was a horrible one-sided deal that should have never.
And eventually, he even recognizes the Golan Heights, a strategic and contested territory, as part of Israel. So Netanyahu begins to look at Trump's presidency as this all-you-can-eat buffet, an opportunity of a lifetime that might allow him to not only secure his legacy, but also save his political career.
Save his political career?
Yeah. In late 2016, right around the time Trump won the election, the Israeli police started investigating Netanyahu for alleged corruption, and eventually in 2019, he was indicted.
What are some of the charges he's facing?
Well, Jonathan, it's a lot of charges. It's bribery, breach of trust, and fraud. And here's just one example. Bibi had all these relationships with wealthy tycoons, and he would ask them for gifts. It was a system. And it got to this point where he allegedly received $200,000 worth of gifts like cigars and champagne.
Was Netanyahu always like this, Barak?
Actually not, because for a long time he was basically a moderate conservative. But after several years in office, he radicalized and started shifting to the hard right. And as his legal situation deteriorated, Bibi became very politically dependent on the settler lobby, which pushed the idea of annexation of the West Bank. In 2019, Bibi gets indicted, but he knows that if he wins his next elections by a landslide, he might be able to stop the investigations. And one way to win, he thinks, is by convincing Trump to support annexation right before the elections.
Okay,
so,
pause it.
Yeah, so is this why he's doing the stuff with the courts now? Is because he's under investigation for all this fraud and stuff?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But it's interesting because this is why you want to listen to this. This is strict dictator's handbook, because it really shows, you look at why is a politician doing something, and it's like, okay, they're getting hit with all these fraud charges. They're in trouble of, if they lose power, of going to jail.
Yeah.
Or having some other, legal harm imposed upon them for being corrupt. And so it's like, okay, I have to win by any means necessary. I have to hold on to power by any means necessary. And oh, look, in order to maintain power, I have to get in bed with these crazy people over here, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's not just going to jail that they're afraid of, because these people live high on the hog. They have a lifestyle that's very, very ritzy. Look, he got a gift worth $200,000 that was just booze and cigars.
It was a collection of gifts, but yes, he had all these, rich people giving him all this crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And just the power to be, so powerful for so many years, right? And to give that up, I'm sure for a lot of people,
that's painful.
Goes to their head. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen Goodfellas. I know how it ends. I feel like a schmuck. I'm in this apartment. reading the newspaper like every normal schmuck.
When I order some linguine, they give you egg noodles with ketchup. Yes.
Yeah, look.
Right.
That's fate worse than death to most of these people.
Yep.
Yeah. Makes you think about Trump's legal issues.
Most people have heard about Israeli settlements. What's the difference between settlements and annexation?
Well, Jonathan, Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967, and since then, it's been building settlements there, a move that most countries also consider illegal under international law. And settlements are taking over more and more land in the West Bank where Palestinians wanted to have their state. And still, this is all temporary, at least symbolically. But if Israel annexes the land and applies its laws to the West Bank, it means that its occupation becomes permanent. In that case, the two-state solution would be off the table for good. But for Netanyahu to go ahead with annexation, he needs the support of the most powerful country in the world, the United States. And he sees the launch of the Trump peace plan as an opportunity to get it.
So now we're in 2020. It's just before the peace plan unveiling that we began this episode with.
In a nutshell, here's the deal. 1/3 of the occupied West Bank would go to the Israelis. That would be more than the Israelis had ever been offered. The rest would make up a new Palestinian state, but it would be like little splotches on a map, no continuity at all. They would have to travel from city to city through bridges and tunnels. And although the Palestinians would get a capital in parts of East Jerusalem, Israel would continue controlling all the holy sites in the city. For Israel, the deal is a victory. For the Palestinians, it's a nightmare. And Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas even calls it the slap of the century.
And here's where it gets even more bizarre.
America's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, tells the Israelis that Trump will go along with annexation. But Friedman didn't let the White House know that that's what he told the Israelis.
So that's a...
Oh my God.
What do you call that?
That's why you don't have your bankruptcy lawyer, okay, be the diplomat to a major country that has all these geopolitical problems.
Look, I can talk Trump into doing anything.
This is what's so wild, because so there's a thing where giving your political allies cushy, one of the ways you can give your political allies a cushy job is you make them diplomat of some country that has good relations with your country that no one cares about.
Right.
Okay. You're gonna, I don't know.
Of course. If this is
true, but it's you're the diplomat of Bora Bora. I don't know. You give someone the diplomacy to some country that no one cares about.
England
doesn't have some. Well, I mean, England's important. They're doing big trade deals and things. So I don't know about England, but that's just one of the ways in which these things are done. But you don't do it to
but not important.
Right. You don't do it to Israel. What the fuck? It's this massive geopolitical hotspot where all these problems are occurring 24/7. And you're like, oh, let me just make my bankruptcy lawyer.
Wait a second here. He's his bankruptcy lawyer. He's worked with this guy 100 times. Okay.
Yeah, but this guy's an idiot. He just says without clearing it with the White House, he just says oh, by the way, we're
trust your bankruptcy lawyer. Who can you trust?
Yeah, we're exactly. He just says this without clearing the White House. He's gonna be oh yeah, we're totally good for you to just annex the West Bank. What the hell? That's insane.
This is insane. So the Netanyahu people, they think, oh look, we've got clearance from the White House.
They're doing backflips.
You ain't got clearance from the White. Look, Trump doesn't even know about this yet.
Yes, this is
you
insane.
Ain't got no clearance.
This is so wild to me.
The plot thickens. Okay, the bankruptcy attorney spilled the beans a little too early.
Trump and Kushner, they're not thinking about annexation at all. They're trying to put together this peace plan to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Kushner wants the plan out before the US presidential campaign consumes everything and as a preparation for a possible second term of the Trump administration. So when Bibi comes to Washington on January 26th, he is sure he's going to get an okay from Trump for annexation. And I remember how in the day before the ceremony at the White House, several conservative commentators, the Israeli equivalents of Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson, were literally dancing in Washington at the prospect of getting this green light for annexation. But what they don't realize at that point is that there's actually a massive disconnect between Trump and Bibi on this issue.
By the bankruptcy attorney.
Doug the Star, President of the United States, thank you, and the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
So it's now January 28th, 2020. More than 100 guests gather in the White House ballroom for the unveiling of Trump's much-anticipated attempt to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Today, Israel takes a big step towards peace.
It's been 3 years in the making. It's an odd crowd. It's mostly American and Israeli conservatives, hardliners like Senator Ted Cruz. There are no Palestinians. Trump has just finished presenting his plan, and Netanyahu takes the mic.
Mr. President, your deal of the century is the opportunity of the century. And rest assured, Israel will not miss this opportunity.
Trump is standing a little behind Bibi, and off to the side. Bibi is going on, and Trump actually looks bored. But then Netanyahu says something that gets his attention.
Israel will apply its laws to the Jordan Valley, to all the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, and to other areas that your plan designates as part of Israel, and which the United States has agreed to recognize as part of Israel.
Trump is like, what the fuck? What the fuck? They're like, what did he just say? What was that? Isn't this hilarious?
Yeah, so basically that he just said that apply their laws to the area. That means that they would annex all these parts of the West Bank to be Israel. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And Trump's like, wait, I didn't give the okay for any of that shit.
Yes.
He's sitting right there.
Yes.
Oh, this is so juicy.
In other words, Netanyahu says that Israel will start annexing its portion of the West Bank right away. And you can see Trump glance at someone off stage as if he's checking to make sure that's really what he heard. And when the evening wrapped up and Netanyahu left the White House, Trump turned to his advisors and shouted, "What the hell was that?" One of Trump's advisors told me that the president was waiting to hear Netanyahu reaching out to the Palestinians, but instead, he just got a campaign speech. And I remember that this Trump advisor told me that Bibi turned the president into a potted plant.
Wow.
So at this point, Trump realizes that he and Netanyahu have completely different ideas about what's going to happen next. Barak, what happens in the aftermath of this event?
I remember that I walked across the street from the White House to the Blair House, and we were all sitting around this long wooden table, and Bibi was going on and on about what a historic moment this is. And then he said, I'm going to bring a resolution to my cabinet to start annexing all the settlements and the Jordan Valley, which is around 20% of the West Bank. And he says, I'm going to do it Sunday, which is like 5 days away. Trump is livid when he finds out.
That was really going too far. That was going way too far. And we were not happy about that.
Kushner is really upset too. He calls Friedman into his office and gives him a dress down. And he says, David, this is not what I told the president that is going to happen. We're not doing this. And Kushner then makes Friedman cross the street to the Blair House too and deliver this very bad news to Bibi. This was a terrible, terrible night for Netanyahu. It was really humiliating. What he thought will be the opportunity of the century just became the embarrassment of the century. And the next day, he and Friedman were just forced to walk back everything they said the day before on annexation. And on the plane back to Israel, Netanyahu told us that it was just this miscommunication with the White House, and it was clear to everybody it was just bullshit. The White House and the Israelis barely...
So I was looking into this guy, the David Friedman, the bankruptcy lawyer. There's an article when he was appointed to the position in 2016.
Yeah.
That says Donald Trump's Israel ambassador is a hardline pro-settler lawyer.
Wow.
Says and supposedly this was known before he was put into position. So this is Trump's screw up. He set out a number of hardline positions on Israel-Palestine, including an opposition to the two-state solution and strong support for the undivided Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. He called Obama an anti-Semite and suggested that Jews who opposed the Israel annexation of the West Bank are worse than Nazi-era prisoners who served as concentration camp guards.
So, wow.
So
that's pretty hard line, yeah.
Yeah, this is the guy he makes, the ambassador to Israel. So not the great choice.
Well, this guy is basically trying to usurp Trump's power. He's trying to use Trump's power for what he wants.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is the problem, that if you're doling out these positions, this is the problem. Someone's going to try to do something like this in your name.
Right. Yeah. You're going to be on the hook. Yeah.
Talk for a month. And then a dramatic thing happened. It's never been reported before. Ron Dermer, Israel's ambassador to Washington, comes to see Kushner. They were sitting in Kushner's office, not very far from the Oval Office. They were friends and they liked each other, but it didn't seem that way on this particular day. Dermer blamed Kushner for embarrassing Netanyahu when he was in the midst of a critical election campaign. Kushner pushed back. He said no US president had ever done more for Israel than Donald Trump. And at this point, things really started to escalate because Dermer said that Netanyahu doesn't know if he could ever trust the Trump administration again. Kushner has heard enough. He just calls Dermer's comments disgusting, and he actually shouts at him, "Get the hell out of here," and he throws him out of the office.
This sounds like the lowest point in the US-Israel relationship since Trump assumed office. And in this moment, it's hard to imagine that just a few months later, the Trump administration would successfully negotiate an agreement with Israel and 4 other Arab nations. Next time.
Okay, so how this is like a movie, okay?
It's totally a movie.
Yeah, this is like, second act. We're at the lowest part for the Trump administration.
This is like the all is lost right here.
Right. They've enraged both the Palestinians and the Israel. How the hell do they pull together and cobble this peace agreement?
I don't know if we should pause here or pause. Yeah. I guess we'll pause in the middle because we have aristocracy at 3, so we've kind of messed up here a bit.
It's okay. I mean, we can pause here and people can just be like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" You're just going to have to stick around to find out.
Okay.
Because we will listen to the rest of it after.
So we'll read some super chats. Well, we got like 20 minutes before aristocracy. Do you want to start on the second half or?
Okay, let's just start in the second half. Why not?
I have to.
You got to find it though.
Yes, I do. Unfortunately.
It might be easier to find. I had the link. I thought
to the second one. Yeah, do that. Send that to me.
It's in the. Oh, here it is. Wait, I'll just send it.
Oh no, wait! I got it right here. Part 2. Okay. I think this should work.
Let's see.
You can see it, right?
Duke Norton for $20.
Not many foreign policy deals in the Trump administration really.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Mattered. But the Abraham Accords did. They fundamentally reshaped the Middle East. And when Donald Trump signed the Accords on September 15th of last year, even he didn't realize how much they'd changed things.
Yes, here are just a few things that have changed in the last year. 250,000 Israelis went to Dubai last year. They couldn't do it before. Cyber experts from Israel and Morocco are working together now. Soldiers from Israel and Bahrain and the US are training together in the Red Sea, sending a signal to Iran. And all of those unprecedented things happened after the lowest point in relations between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government. The Abraham Accords happened almost by accident last year in a desperate attempt to stop Israel from illegally annexing parts of the West Bank and destabilizing the region. We're going to take you behind the scenes with never before reported accounts from the key players who negotiated the deal. They took the failed peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians, which we told you about in episode 1, and used it to create a different deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. 3 other Arab countries have joined the agreements, and the Biden administration is now trying to expand it even more. I'm Barak Ravid, Axios Middle East correspondent.
And I'm Jonathan Swan. This is how it happened. Trump's big deal. Part 2. From Secret Alliance to the Abraham Accords. Our story begins in March of 2019.
It's a Sunday morning, and a man shows up at Jared Kushner's house in Washington. His name is Yusuf El-Otaiba. He's been described as the most powerful man in Washington that you've never heard of. He's the United Arab Emirates ambassador to the United States. Kushner's been expecting him. They take a seat in his living room. Right away, El-Otaiba says something that surprises Kushner. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, wants to normalize relations with Israel, open embassies, economic ties, and borders. This would be a big deal. No Arab country had normalized relations with Israel in 25 years.
On the surface, it seemed like the UAE had no relationship with Israel. But appearances can be deceiving, can't they?
Exactly, Jonathan. Because behind the scenes, the UAE and Israel had a clandestine relationship for a quarter century. It started with Israel allowing the Emiratis to get US military aid. It continued with a growing security and intelligence relationship, quiet business deals, and even a secret Israeli diplomatic office in Dubai. The White House loved the idea of the UAE and Israel making their relationship public, but politics in Israel got in the way. A year later, the seed that was planted by El-Otaiba would bear fruit and turn an international diplomatic crisis into a historic breakthrough that reshaped the Middle East.
So now it's May of 2020. The United States is in the middle of the COVID pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests. And President Trump is growing increasingly concerned about his re-election campaign.
Meanwhile, in Israel, after 3 rounds of elections, Netanyahu finally managed to form a coalition government. He does that with his arch-rival, retired General Benny Gantz. In their agreement, there is one issue Bibi refused to compromise on: annexing around a third of the occupied West Bank, making it formally part of Israel.
Gantz is calling for delay in consultation. Netanyahu is doubling down.
He really wants that land, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, I don't know with him if it's just because he's so reliant on the settler vote, which is probably a big thing, or if he's just become so ideologically possessed about it. I would assume the vote is the thing motivating him.
We don't know enough about Israel politics to know, but I would love to know.
Yeah.
Right?
Bibi believes if he doesn't act fast, it will never happen. So when he's sworn in, he sets a deadline to start annexation, July 1st, just 10 weeks away.
So July 1st becomes this kind of ticking time bomb for leaders trying to stop Israel from annexing parts of the West Bank. Barak, how did the world react to Bibi declaring this timeline?
Well, Jonathan, it was widespread condemnation. First, annexation is illegal under international law. And second, if Netanyahu were to carry it out, a 2-state solution would be off the table for good, and the region would be even more destabilized. In fact, Jordan threatens annexation will undermine its peace agreement with Israel. and dozens of countries in the region and beyond are weighing in. But one voice from the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, seems to cut through the rest.
Hi, my name is Yusuf Al Otaiba. I'm the UAE ambassador to the United States.
3 weeks before the July 1st deadline, Al Otaiba wrote an article against annexation, which was published in Hebrew in an Israeli newspaper. It was a very big deal. It was the first time the UAE had ever engaged with the Israeli press.
I believe that annexation was going to have horrendous consequences for the region. And I think it was going to put the US in a very awkward spot because they were going to have to defend an incredibly unpopular decision in the region.
Al Otaiba's article made big headlines in Israel and around the world, and it's a key moment in the story.
Why do you think it resonated so much?
First, because it was a direct message to the Israeli people at a very critical moment. And second, it really undermined Bibi's spin that the Arab world doesn't care about annexation.
Okay, Barak, so is there anyone in the Trump administration who supports annexation at this point?
Well, Jonathan, only one guy still wanted annexation. This was David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel.
Go figure.
After Netanyahu's July...
Go figure, right? You didn't see that coming, did you, Sitch?
What a surprise.
What a surprise. The bankruptcy attorney.
Yes, classic.
Just when you thought you had friends, someone's been using you.
July 1st announcement, Friedman starts pushing Jared Kushner very hard. And in one conversation, Kushner told Friedman, "Listen, David, you're 6,000 miles away, and you don't understand what's going on here. We have COVID, the elections. This is not the first priority for the president right now." But Friedman...
Look, not only does he care so much about it, he's in Jared Kushner's office trying to push this up the stack to important.
Right.
When Trump is worried about being reelected.
Yep.
Isn't that crazy?
But this is why you can't, you should not be putting ideologues in positions of power to be ambassadors to key countries, because they're going to be delusionally biased in terms of what they're advocating for.
Of course. Yeah. It's hilarious.
And just couldn't let it go. And finally, in the middle of COVID, he flies to Washington on a government plane for an Oval Office meeting. And at this point, Netanyahu's July 1st deadline is only 1 week away.
So Friedman shows up to Washington.
Look, okay, so Friedman is flying in to talk to Trump. Friedman was the one that told Netanyahu to move forward. So Netanyahu is probably pressuring him, why'd you put me in this position?
Yes.
He's horrified by this.
With some pretty grand ambitions. Who was at this meeting in the Oval Office?
We had President Trump, obviously, and Friedman. There's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, Jared Kushner, and Avi Berkowitz.
So tell me about Avi Berkowitz.
Berkowitz is 31 years old at the time, and he's Trump's Middle East envoy. And in some ways, he's a classic Trump administration story. He met Kushner in 2011 during a basketball game at a Passover retreat in Arizona.
Naturally.
Yeah, and they became friends. And in 2016, Berkowitz joined the Trump campaign. And he was the one who suggested that they broadcast Trump's election rallies on Facebook Live. And that's what gets him into Trump's inner circle and eventually lands him in the West Wing at this critical meeting.
So, Barak, what's the feeling in the room?
Trump is in a very bad mood, and Trump starts delivering this monologue of complaints about Bibi and the speech he gave when Trump presented his Middle East peace plan in January. And Friedman tries to speak up, but Trump interrupts him and he says, "David, why are we even talking about this?" And he says, "David, I've done more for Israel than any other president in history." Friedman's pitch is going nowhere. He even admits that not everyone in the Israeli government supports annexation. But Trump is done. And he points at Mike Pompeo and he says, "You know what? If you want to do it, I don't have a problem. Mike, you decide.
Seriously?
Seriously.
So
Wait.
basically, Trump outsourced.
What? Wait. He's all like, I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to do this. Blah, 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 blah. And then
Mike
he's like,
Pompeo.
whatever. I don't even care anymore. You, Mike Pompeo, you figure this out. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Is it Mike Pompeo, that super right wing mayor? Who's Mike Pompeo?
No, he was the Secretary of State.
Okay.
Was he mayor at some point? I mean, he might have been. I don't remember.
No,
he was in the House. I know that. He was the CIA director, I think, briefly. I don't know if he was a mayor.
Mike Pompeo, an American politician who served in the administration of Trump, director of... Oh, wow. He was CIA, huh? Okay.
For Trump, for a year, yeah.
For some reason, I thought this was the guy who was like the border guy. Wanted to like seal the border up.
I don't know what you're talking about, but no, that was
anyway. Moving on. So yeah, he's like, look, I'm in a bad mood. You decide.
That's so weird.
You haven't heard this, have you?
No, I didn't hear part 2. No.
Okay, look, Trump pulls it off, man. Trump. Look,
okay.
It's hard to hate Trump. It really is, because he's just like, he's got instinct. I can respect the game.
Right.
Trump has game. He has great game.
Right.
So listen to this. This is perfect.
This is the US government's position on Israeli annexation of the West Bank to Mike Pompeo.
Yes, but wait for this. He then turns to everybody else in the room and he says, you should know that if anything bad happens, it's on all of your heads.
That does not surprise me.
Isn't
okay, so this is like the classic, like, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Okay, you decide, but
I know, but
if this goes wrong, everyone in this room is totally screwed.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, you're right. That's a good, this classic instinct. It's a classic, I'm going to let you decide, but I'm going to totally bias you to do the thing I want you to do anyway.
Right.
Because if you tell everyone that if it goes south and it's on your head, that's going to naturally make people be more conservative. I don't mean politically, but just more conservative in terms of holding steady the pre-existing course. Because then if there is a problem, it's not your fault, right? It's only your fault if you change something and then it goes wrong.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no. He's basically, think long and hard before you do whatever you're going to do.
Right.
That does not surprise me.
And, Friedman kind of freaks out because the idea of this being on his head starts to scare.
Fucking Friedman has taken no responsibility for any of this shit all the way through.
I know. Good.
Finally, he's like, oh, man.
Yep.
Now I have to take responsibility.
Yep.
You don't like that.
Scare him.
So what happens next?
Kushner is running the show at this point, and he sends Berkowitz with Friedman back to Jerusalem.
So Avi Berkowitz is in the most extraordinary situation. He is representing the United States as their peace negotiator, and he's being asked to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu to try to strong-arm him into putting annexation on hold. I mean, was he nervous about this?
Yeah, he was really nervous.
Okay, so Avi Berkowitz flies to Israel. What happens next?
Well, he and Friedman have 3 meetings over 4 days with Netanyahu. And you have to remember, we're in the middle of COVID, and the setting of this meeting was pretty bizarre. Here's Berkowitz.
I remember, my seat was in the center of the room with David on my left, and the prime minister was seated behind his desk with this very large, glass shield in front of him. It was not the most conducive atmosphere for a really intense meeting. Something out of a sci-fi film, more likely.
This first meeting started badly. Netanyahu blamed Berkowitz for leaking stories to the press, and Berkowitz protested and called Bibi's accusations offensive. But at a certain point, Friedman leaves the room, and Berkowitz looks at Netanyahu, and he says, look, I don't know what David Friedman told you, but the meeting with the president about annexation, went really bad. And Jonathan, he tells Netanyahu that any annexation would have to be accompanied by significant concessions to the Palestinians. And at that moment, Netanyahu gets even angrier. And he actually threatens to go ahead with annexation unilaterally without a green light from Trump. Berkowitz stands up to Netanyahu, saying that he could do that, but then Trump would tweet something negative against him, and he would take away all the international backing that Bibi needs. Berkowitz tells Netanyahu, "You're going to take your greatest friend in the world and make him an enemy. I can't tell you what to do, but I honestly advise you not to do it." 2 days later, Avi sees Netanyahu again for the second time, but they still get nowhere.
Yeah, I know. We have to mention the power of Twitter here, right?
Yeah, well, this was so interesting. So we have Friedman, who's some idiot, right? Apparently, it seems like he's a total idiot, even though he's Trump's bankruptcy lawyer. And then just by happenstance, Kushner meets this random guy who seems
who's actually smart. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what's going on here. And he's like, yeah, listen, you could do what you're going to do, but Trump's going to send out a negative tweet.
Exactly. Trump is going to at you on Twitter, Netanyahu.
Right. Well,
he's going to fucking at you.
And it's interesting because there is, part of the things that people would say about Trump that would be a positive, which is true, is that since he isn't constrained by normal
social norms
or even political norms, Netanyahu could, like, if this was like a normal president, you think, okay, if he went ahead and did this, the president of the US is going to complain, but like, what are they going to
do anything? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like maybe they'll cut funding, like they're not going to do anything. But with Trump, you're like, he could do something insane. He could just cut relations with Israel. Who knows what he could do, something totally unhinged, right? And so that actually plays to Trump's benefit because it scares foreign countries into like, okay, I guess I do have to maybe go along with something that he wants.
Look, he has all these fraud accusations against him. Bibi does. Like Trump could tweet out, "Oh, this guy's a fraudster. Look at all the who knows?"
That's a good point too. Yeah,
who knows what he's gonna do?
Right. And and Trump would totally do something like that. Because,
he would. Yeah. He would easily. Oh my God, this is insane.
This is so good.
The power of this is like the power of Twitter for good, though, right? I mean, I feel like it is.
It definitely was beneficial in this
useful
moment.
Here. Yeah.
Right.
So that night when Berkowitz,
you want to say something?
I was going to say it's 7 now. Should we?
Oh no, she said she's running late, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Goes back to his hotel, he calls Kushner, and they're both really desperate and frustrated, but they decide to give it another shot. This time with a new idea, offering a carrot instead of a stick. 24 hours before the July 1st deadline, Avi meets Netanyahu one more time before he flies home. And he asks Bibi if he'd be willing to drop annexation in exchange for normalizing relations with the United Arab Emirates, opening embassies and trade. Bibi is skeptical. He said he's willing to think about it, but he still wanted to talk about annexation. So after 4 days and 3 meetings, Berkowitz flies home to the US on a red-eye. He's exhausted. He lands in Washington and heads to the White House. On the way, his phone rings. It's Yusuf El-Utaiba.
We'll be back in a moment.
Oh, sure you will.
Thank you.
Oh, we had to hear the wind chimes. Oh, thanks.
So, Jonathan, Berkowitz picks up the call with El-Utaiba.
It was godsend. It was one of the best phone calls I've ever had in my life.
This guy just sounds like a normal dude.
I know.
Doesn't he?
A random college kid.
Oh, yeah.
I was playing basketball with Jared Kushner, and we were talking about Halo 3, and now I'm like trying to high level diplomatic talks to try to get Netanyahu to stop annexing the West Bank.
I know. Oh God, it's like straight out of a movie.
Yes.
Look, I told Trump, you should put your rallies on Facebook. He liked that idea.
You're right. This is like, how is this not a Fincher movie already?
Of course.
A David Fincher movie or a Sorkin movie.
All the way, yeah. It might be a movie one day. I mean, it's hilarious. Well, I guess Hollywood kind of hates Trump, though. They would never make a movie that paints Trump in any sort of
but see, this is what's interesting. This actually undermines Trump, because everyone is giving Trump all these accolades for the Accords, but if it's really just this guy, right?
Oh, I know, the dude, bro.
It's just this random dude is like because he had this. I mean, this is why this story is so insane. So like I had no clue about any of this. We're literally 24 hours away from Israel annexing the West Bank unilaterally. And this guy just floats this idea to Netanyahu, and he's like, Netanyahu's like, okay, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, totally. Who knows if he can even deliver it? He's like, yeah, what the hell? See what we can do.
We're both trying to find a way to avert annexation.
This is Aloteba.
And we started thinking of ideas. This idea came up.
He brought up the possibility of Israel not going forward with the annexation in exchange for the United Arab Emirates normalizing relations with Israel.
And what do you tell him?
I said, you might not believe this, but I had a very similar thought the other day.
Okay, wait, pause it. So what just happened, to be clear, was that by like cosmic universal luck and chance, okay, after this guy says this to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's skeptical of it, the diplomat of the UAE calls him and tells him that he had the same idea.
Yep.
And he didn't know, so presumably he didn't know that this was going on. So they just had some sort of like magical cosmic mind linking at the moment.
Look, I'm telling you, it's more important to be lucky. It really is.
Yes, it's always better to be lucky than smart.
It is.
Yes, this is like
luck is a godsend.
This guy rolled the nat 20 on his way back to the White House. Okay, like this is insane.
I know.
At the same time, on July 1st in Jerusalem, fewer than 5 people in Israel knew that annexation was dying and that normalization was going to be the new game in town. For Netanyahu, it was a tough moment, and he decided to cut his losses. And for the rest of July, the 3 sides hammered out a deal. Its general terms were clear: normalization for stopping annexation.
So, Barak, what was the negotiating process like?
Well, Jonathan, this is very interesting because Avi Berkowitz told me that the 3 sides never met together until the deal was decided.
All of the negotiations were done through Jared and myself in Washington. So we would meet bilaterally with one party, and then we would meet bilaterally with the other party.
So the reason the American, Israeli, and Emirati negotiators never met was that for the Emiratis, they wanted to make sure that when the Israelis are making a commitment, they're not making this commitment to them, that they're making this commitment to the United States. And it wasn't easy. At one point, while the Americans were passing drafts between the sides, the Israeli ambassador Dermer called Berkowitz and said that Bibi would only drop annexation if 3 Arab countries came on board, not just the UAE. Berkowitz told this to Kushner, and Kushner got really mad. He told Berkowitz, tell Ron that one country is all he's gonna get, and if he doesn't want it, he can just go fuck himself. Berkowitz called Dermer and gave him a more toned-down version of this.
Thank goodness, right?
Jared doesn't seem like the greatest diplomat. Okay, he sounds like one of those like Wolf of Wall Street guys.
Totally.
Selling people junk stocks and yelling at them.
Maybe he didn't have his coffee.
Maybe that's fine for business. I don't know if this is the best.
Look, I'm bringing up a picture of Avi Berkowitz. I sent you the picture via DM.
Really? I don't know what
he looks like he's 15 years old.
That's why I say, he sounds like he's straight out of college. Like, it's hilarious.
It is hilarious. Yeah.
And he said, I'll tell you gently, take what you're offered.
So, Barak, when did they decide to make the deal public?
As you can imagine, Trump wanted to make a big splash, so the White House sets August 13th as the day to announce the deal. But then, The day before, Bibi got cold feet because of Israeli domestic politics. And the Israeli ambassador to the US, Ron Dermer, calls the White House and says, "We're not going to sign it."
Oh my God.
This was really a crazy moment, and Kushner and Berkowitz were furious. And Friedman, who at that point had dropped his annexation fantasies and was already in Washington to be in the Oval Office for the announcement, calls the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, and he shouts at Netanyahu's people.
Friedman's finally stepping up.
Finally, yeah. And even Friedman's yelling at you. You know you've done goofed, okay?
I know. You've goofed the floof here.
You've really goofed the floof here, Netanyahu.
He's like, damn you.
People. And he says, "It's happening tomorrow. You don't have a choice." And it worked. Netanyahu got the message.
I got to say,
Wow.
Grok, I covered the Trump administration. I did not know that this came so close to falling apart. And that is the most insane story. So now it's just before the public announcement. They need a name for the agreement.
Well, Jonathan, that's a funny story.
What do you think the name Trump wants is? What do you think
The Trump Israel peace deal.
The day that the deal is
by Trump
supposed to be
Tower.
announced,
I mean, you're close.
and they still don't have a name. A member of the U.S. National Security Team, a two-star general named Miguel Correa, came to Avi Berkowitz and suggested the name, the Abraham Accords. And they went to Kushner with the idea.
And immediately, Jared turns to me and smiles at me and gave me a look. And so I felt like now perhaps he thought that I was behind it.
Because Avi is short for Avram, Abraham in Hebrew.
So I said, Jared, just so you know, I was not involved in choosing of the name. And then we brought the name to the president, and he joked that he thought the Trump Accords would be a better name, but he would be okay with this as well. And then the media came in, and the rest, I guess, is history.
An hour later, on August 13th, Trump, Netanyahu, and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, get on the conference call to seal the deal. Berkowitz and El Otaiba are on the line too. Here's Avi Berkowitz again.
It was extremely quiet. I remember that there was a nervous energy. And as I sat in my chair, even up until this very moment, I was still nervous that some complication would arise.
And then Sheikh Mohammed's line dropped.
Yusuf El Otaiba.
Took about 10 minutes to collect Sheikh Mohammed back on the line. And at that point, my hands were sweating. I think, wow, really? All this hard work, and this might not work because of a technical glitch? So there was a moment of uncertainty right there until everybody got on the line. And then it was incredible energy. I look back at it, and sometimes I still have a hard time believing that we actually pulled everything off.
And right after the call, Trump surprised the world when he announced the deal. And of course, he did it in a tweet, and he let Avi press send.
The diplomatic breakthrough came as a surprise announcement, but the president says it's been in the works for some time.
The two nations are expected to meet in the coming weeks to sign agreements.
The same day, while the world was still processing the news, the finance minister of Bahrain calls the White House, and he tells Kushner and Berkowitz, "We want to be next," because for the Bahrainis, the UAE move was the cover they needed to take their own secret relationship with Israel into the open.
Look at this.
Hilarious.
Everyone's in bed with Israel.
Yes.
Isn't this hilarious?
That's so funny.
It's September 15th, 2020, the South Lawn of the White House. For the first time in 26 years, Arab states have agreed to normalize relations with Israel. It's the UAE and Bahrain.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
There were hundreds of people gathered at the White House. Americans, Israelis, Emiratis. It was really like a huge party.
the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and His Highness.
So each of the leaders, the foreign ministers of Bahrain and the UAE, the Prime Minister of Israel, and President Trump gave speeches. And right after, the leaders sat down at this table which President Harry Truman used for his cabinet meetings.
We kindly ask that all guests remain seated for the signing of the documents.
And then they signed the Abraham Accords.
Send it to me in Arabic.
I will.
Within a few months, Sudan and Morocco joined the agreements. We've said the Abraham Accords have changed the lives of millions of people in the Middle East. Barak, what are the practical changes that have occurred in the year or more since the agreements were signed?
Well, lots of things, Jonathan. Now there are direct flights from Israel to places like Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and Morocco, and there's much more trade. And actually, more countries want to get in on the peace. And the Biden administration is trying to build on it too. They want to get Saudi Arabia.
So what's happened to Bibi Netanyahu in the last year?
Well, Jonathan, he had this huge achievement, but he lost the confidence of his partners in the coalition government. And a few months later, he lost the election. And he's not the prime minister anymore. In fact, he spends most of his weeks in court dealing with his trial on charges of bribery and corruption.
So both Bibi and Trump are out of power now. The popular conception is that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are inseparable, political allies, deeply connected to each other, and also very good friends. What Barak's reporting has revealed is that is utterly false.
Exactly. And just after Trump lost, Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden on winning the elections. And this is where their so-called bromance truly ended. And Trump told me he felt like Bibi stabbed him in the back.
Nobody did more for Bibi, and I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi, but I also like loyalty. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I didn't talk to him. Fuck him.
Wow.
That's kind of crazy, huh? There's Trump with the loyalty again, right?
Yes. But see, and this is also the importance of term limits. Because, Bibi keeps losing and then winning again. Like, he's been in power 6 times.
When did he? So he came back into power. Yeah. I was trying to look it up. So he must have won another election. Because I think this was
2021.
Yeah.
Yeah. He lost in 2021. And then I believe he was the head of the opposition for a year, and then he won again. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like a 4-year cycle. There's all sorts of wacky things that go on, and however this system works, it's not the way that the American system works.
Right.
So
you guys need to get your shit together, man.
Yeah, this is
Look,
bizarre.
I think everything I'm reading on Bibi Netanyahu now is like, this guy's got to go. Yeah.
No, he's not good. Well, see, now what I'm interested in, because I didn't know about any of the specifics of this, which is incredibly fascinating, is to find out there's been a lot of criticism aimed at Joe Biden and the Biden administration, saying that they basically undermined the Abraham Accords and did a lot of things to hurt and destroy the Abraham Accords. And I don't know what those things are. So now I want to look into that to see if that's true or not. Because if that is true, that's incredibly, insanely stupid.
This happens all the time. This is the same way.
Waste this,
Yeah, this is the same thing with Obamacare. Like they want to. They're like, look, the Democrats can't have this win on their books. We need to destroy it.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same instinct. I'm sure Biden is doing the same exact thing.
Well, yeah, and definitely, like the media definitely didn't give the Trump administration the accolades for this that they deserved. Obviously.
Oh my God! If it was a Democratic president, there would have been confetti from the rooftops.
Yeah,
it would have been like, oh my God, peace in the Middle East. It's never happened in our lifetimes.
Right. Well, it's not.
God
not
bless the Democrats.
East, but it's more like preventing Israel from doing something that's going to cause a massive amount of
They would have,
unpeace in the Middle
they
East.
would have framed it as peace in the Middle East.
Yeah, you're right.
That's
you're right.
exactly how they would have
If
framed
Obama or Biden did it, yes, they would have.
They would have given him a Nobel Peace Prize. You know,
right.
Everything would have been history.
But when I'm looking it up, I'm seeing mixed reporting on it. Like some people, it's funny. I see people criticizing Biden for going along with the Abraham Accords. I see people criticizing Biden for not. So I'm kind of confused as to what exactly.
Right.
Happening.
Look, and this is we're basically trying to figure it out because we're trying to come to some conclusions on what's going on in the Middle East right now. So
right.
That's one of the reasons why we're looking at this. I know virtually nothing about these Abraham Accords. I just started reading on this stuff. I'm not sure if you saw the podcast with Piers Morgan and Jordan Peterson.
I didn't finish it, but yeah.
Okay, Jordan Peterson was simping hard for the Abraham Accords. But Jordan Peterson,
Yes.
I mean, he's got to be a bit biased. He had Benjamin Netanyahu on his podcast. Like, he's got a relationship with the guy. So, and I listened to the podcast with Benjamin Netanyahu and Jordan Peterson, and I mean, Netanyahu sounded like a little loony to me, a little loony bins.
But I don't even know
what
if
your take was.
I mean, even I don't know how. I mean, he seems kind of lukewarm on the Abraham Accords anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in the thing that you were talking about, that's what I was kind of referring to, where Jordan Peterson was heavily criticizing Biden for destroying the Abraham Accords. So I was curious to look into the fact claims of that.
Yeah, I am too, obviously. So we're almost done, guys.
Okay, then. There are still questions about the future. What kind of consequences do the Abraham Accords have for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
So, Jonathan, on the one hand, the Accords stopped the annexation of the West Bank by Israel, which could have killed two-state solution for good. On the other hand, the Palestinians really hated the Abraham Accords.
Why did they hate them?
Because when they saw the UAE and Bahrain and then Sudan and then Morocco make peace with Israel, they realized that the influence they had for years over relations between Israel and the Arab world, it really diminished.
Look, stray dictators handbook.
Oh, of course.
And they're like, we are losing power.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I've heard many people say that one of the reasons why these attacks happened on October 7th was because they were worried that they're reaching some pivotal process.
With Saudi Arabia, yeah.
Oh, okay. So Saudi Arabia is joining the Abraham Accords now, and that's what they're trying to...
There was some talk that they might. And I mean, I'm assuming that's put on hold now because of all this stuff.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So. Ouch.
Do you maintain any hope for peace between the Israelis and Palestinians?
Unfortunately.
Hear that heavy sigh?
Yeah, I did hear it.
Oh, man. Look, he doesn't even say anything. That sigh gives it away.
Unfortunately, I don't think we'll see this in my lifetime. But, you know, I didn't think we'd see peace between Israel and this many Arab states either. And that's what we have now.
Thanks, Barak. Your reporting's been fascinating, and it's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, there you go.
I wanted to read this guy's book, but he doesn't have an audio book. It's on Kindle, though. I might listen to it with the computer voice on Kindle, which is not as good.
Not as great, yeah. What's the name of his book? This is the guy that was reporting all this?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the book.
Oh. Well, so we learned the unsung hero of the Abraham Accords, Avi Berkowitz.
Avi Berkowitz, yeah.
Random college student who played basketball with Jared Kushner.
The world is an amazing and wondrous place, guys.
Yeah, just him and the ambassador to UAE had a psychic connection for one brief moment, and it fixed the problem. Look at that.
Well, look, I don't know how fixed it is because of this.
Well, okay, temporarily delayed a problem. Now, I mean, it's interesting now in the future looking back on this because obviously, you know.
Well, look, I don't even think you can say temporarily delayed a problem. It actually created a new problem because the Abraham Accords were evidently partially responsible for this attack.
Yeah, no, and I
Because
mean, well, yeah, I've heard, and I mean, it sounds logical. We don't know, obviously, it's 100% true that Iran really doesn't want Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. Hamas obviously doesn't want that either. The PA obviously doesn't want that either. And so, if Iran has influence on Hamas, I mean, the logical progression would be, I mean, at least they'd be in favor of doing some radical action to try to sabotage, the Saudis and Israel normalizing relations.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if Iran would be on board with this radical action because I feel like this could actually backfire significantly.
Well,
and actually, I think
you're talking about the attacks.
Yeah, because they were so horrific.
Right. But supposedly you'd think Iran had to sign off to some extent.
I don't know. I don't know the extent of that.
You don't think so? I mean,
I have no clue.
A lot of people have postulated that Iran.
Yeah, people have postulated that, but to me, because this could have very easily backfired. I'm trying to remember because this is why, like, right when this happened, there were a lot of eyes on what was Saudi Arabia's response going to be.
Right.
Because the attacks were so horrific. It was kind of like 9/11 in America, where the attacks seemed so awful to the rest of the world that even our enemies and frenemies were kind of like, okay, that's kind of messed up. Like they were like, that's too much. And I think if Netanyahu was smarter, he might have been able, before doing the bombing campaign, he might have been able to leverage this into normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia before they started their attack on Gaza.
Okay. I was distracted through all of that. So the audience can listen.
Okay.
I should have been listening.
All I said was
the share screen thing was messing with me. So
yeah, all I said was Netanyahu, if he was a little bit smarter. Now the timing of this would be very important, but he might have been able to leverage the empathy that the world would have for the attack to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia before they went and started bombing Gaza.
No, yeah. The fact that Netanyahu is in charge now is a huge L.
Detriment.
A big L. A big giant fucking L.
Now that might, well, I just want to be clear. Now that might not be, what I suggested might not be possible because the Saudis might want to drag their feet for a long time. And obviously Netanyahu, both because they have hostages and just because of political pressure, he needs a quick response to whatever the response is going to be. He can't just drag his feet on a response. So it would have to be, very touch and go to see if you could manifest that into something positive.
Yeah, this whole thing is kind of demoralizing. So I do feel Israel is losing the moral high ground relatively quickly here, which is super, super unfortunate. It really is. So it would have been nice if they use this opportunity to push for peace. I mean, I understand the situation, though. Obviously, they got over 100 of their people over there still as hostages, and they don't even know if they're alive or dead. So, I mean, this is just a major. It really bothered me that the UN, and I don't know if you saw the clip, but the Jewish contingent of the UN was advocating for them to do one of these non-binding resolutions saying basically release the hostages immediately. And they didn't do it.
Who's the Jewish contingent of the UN?
What's that? The Israeli contingent.
Oh, sorry, you said
UN.
the Jewish. I was like, what?
Well, yeah, I guess. Well, they did a thing where they basically wore the Star of David on their suit lapels, saying that they were going to wear the Star of David until they did a resolution, which, I mean, it's moving, obviously. So, but the UN did a resolution for a ceasefire. I'm like, I understand that the UN doesn't have, control over Hamas, but all of these UN resolutions are non-binding anyway. They did one for a ceasefire, but Israel is under no obligation to, like, it's not law.
Yeah,
It's
I
basically
think,
like a suggestion. They could make a suggestion. Hey, release the hostages.
right. I think Israel, and by Israel, I guess Netanyahu, his handling of this has been really poor and stupid.
It's been terrible.
And I think it probably speaks to the political pressures that he has to satiate the radical elements of the country who probably just want to level Gaza and don't care about the people there. Because this is where I think he's screwing up. Israel needs to be hyper crystal clear with the entire world what it's doing and what it's looking for. And so, like, there were rumors and speculations that, like, oh, Israel offered the ceasefire in exchange for the hostages. And that was it. Those were the only grounds, right? And if that's true, that shouldn't be a rumor. Israel should just say that.
It should be an announcement. Exactly.
That should be trumpeted from the rooftops, because if Israel says that, it's kind of hard for everyone rhetorically to be against Israel. They're not even asking, if they weren't even asking for Hamas to disarm, or they were just asking for the hostages back, right?
They can't say that though, because if the hostages show up the next day, they're still going to turn it into a parking lot. That's exactly what they're going to do.
I know. But so what? I'm just saying, we're talking about rhetoric. We're not talking about what is actually moral or what they actually do. I'm just saying rhetorically.
Oh, right? Man. If all the hostages, all the alive hostages show up, who knows? Like,
well,
half
it's a
of them
gamble.
are probably dead.
It's a weird gamble.
It is a gamble,
because Israel doesn't actually. It's an ask that Israel doesn't want Hamas to do.
They don't, and that is horrifying.
Yeah, but I know. So it's a gamble. So you say, well, is Hamas actually going to do it or not? Is Hamas going to pull that trigger? And so Israel could always stipulate something that they know they wouldn't, but that the world at wide would have to agree with, like, give us all the hostages and also disarm, right? Something, but they need to give something, right? Because then Hamas isn't going to agree with that, but everyone else is going to have to agree with that from a moral perspective, right?
Yeah, because you could say give all the hostages and turn central leadership over to the authorities. Or turn the people who actually, or turn the people who actually committed these heinous acts. I mean, half of them are on video somewhere anyway.
Yeah, there are things that that Israel could push for, and they could push for, like, if they're afraid that Hamas would do it, just on the hostages alone. And there are other stipulations that would still give Israel the moral high ground optically, but you would think Hamas would never go along with.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Netanyahu's handling of this situation is fucking insanely stupid. Number one. Number two, in terms of being crystal clear, is that Israel hasn't really been clear, at least globally, with what their plan exactly is. Because if they were saying, like, we're bombing strategic things to create a corridor so we can send in the military to free the hostages, right?
Military's already in. I don't know how much you've watched.
No, I know they are. But I'm saying, if they said this, okay.
No, I know. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Then because right now, now you might say, well, that's not smart militarily, blah, 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 blah. But what you have to understand is that what matters more importantly than the military aspect of it is how the rest of the world views it. Because the rest of the world is basically viewing it, whether it's true or not, because who the fuck knows, since everything is opaque. The rest of the world is viewing it like, well, Israel's just blowing shit up for revenge. That's how the rest of the world is viewing the actions. They're not viewing it in terms of, like, they're actually doing something for some strategic purpose to save hostages or to eliminate Hamas. And people don't understand how important these narratives are in terms of shaping global perception.
Final thoughts, and then we'll move on.
That was it.
That's it? All right. Clip it, CT. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.